15-minute cities. Amarjit Sohi's election platform, making Edmonton a 15-minute city. But now, this is called a conspiracy theory. Amarjit Sohi expects the majority of Edmontonians are very smart and sophisticated people who will not believe this conspiracy theory being promoted online. 15-minute cities, the lockdown new normal. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and you caught me just trying to get my tinfoil hat made so I could discuss this conspiracy theory with you. But it's not a conspiracy. There's lots of evidence to show that these 15-minute cities are not what they appear to be. There may be some applications for a 15-minute city in various parts of the world for reasons of density, lack of parking, lack of access, too much air pollution from diesel cars, especially in Europe. But that's not the case for Alberta and not the case for most of Canada. So let's go on with the show here. It's quite a long presentation, so I hope that you feel free to pause and go have a tea or something and come back and hear the rest of it. I'll also be posting the PowerPoint online so that you can see the links and follow through on them if you want more information. So on with the show. "15-minute cities, the lockdown new normal." Have we already had climate lockdowns? Well, let's see. After the Paris 2015 COP21 conference, at that conference, Ivo de Boer, who was the executive secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change at the time, said the only way that a 2015 agreement can achieve a 2-degree Celsius goal is to shut down the whole global economy. And in 2016, right after that, this report called Deadline 2020 was issued. Deadline 2020, How Cities Will Get the Job Done, provides an analysis of the contribution that the 84 global C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group need to make to convert the agreement from aspiration to reality. C40 cities need to reduce emissions from an annual average of about 5 tons CO2 equivalent per citizen today to around 2.9 tons CO2 equivalent per citizen by 2030. Wonder how you do that? Well, here's what they say right there in the report. They want to reduce your emissions to 2.9 tons CO2 equivalent per capita by 2030. But our friend Darshan Maharaja went online. We were discussing the Century Initiative that Canada has to bring 100 million people into Canada, or actually bring the population up to 100 million. He said that per capita emissions of CO2 in Canada was 16.58 tons in 2016. So just imagine what kind of a cut to your lifestyle this would have to be. And in fact, they even think they can go to 0 tons CO2 emissions, equivalent emissions, by 2050. And here we have Catherine McKenna and Mayor Amarjit Sohi of Edmonton on their way to COP27. They can fly, but you have to bike. Oh, and here's Mayor Dawn Iveson biking to work in Winter Bike to Work Day. You know what? If you like to bike to work, that's fantastic. Everybody should have that choice. But if it means that you can't drive to work, or you can't have a downtown office, or that you'll be restricted in some way from enjoying those freedoms of movement, then I don't think that that's in keeping with our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So now we come to September 2019. This is the exponential roadmap, which was curiously issued in September of 2019, and the solutions were to halve global emissions by 2030, to cut them in half. See their cute little graphic here? And curiously, during lockdowns, the only organization in the world that celebrated the absolute devastation that was going on in our cities was the World Economic Forum, who put out this video saying lockdowns are quietly improving cities around the world while people's lives were being absolutely destroyed and cities were being gutted. Now, one of the authors of the exponential roadmap is this fellow, Johan Rockstrom, and he summarizes his carbon law pathway. So he thinks that we need moonshot thinking and exponential strategies inspired by Moore's law. Now, first of all, Moore's law, I don't know if everybody knows what that is. Moore's law is related to computer chips, that the computing capacity doubles every year or something like that. It's kind of a law of industrial development, if you like, or algorithmic development is more like it, that has led the chip industry, computer chip industry, along the path of rapid development for many years. But they now are at a limit, actually, to how much more computing ability they can put on a chip. And likewise, it does not apply to the energy that we use in our daily life. These are not things that can be compared. Now, you should notice here that Rockstrom is advocating for emissions peak by 2020, that they fall about 50% by 2030, 50% again by 2040, and 50% by 2050. Now, he also advocates here for a roadmap for rapid decarbonization. Well, in that article, he wants a $400 a ton global carbon tax law. And he's really a zealot. But you can see he's closely associated with the World Economic Forum. He wants to keep the world temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And he says ridiculous things like this: of all tasks, the phasing out of fossil fuels is the easy one. There's no excuse not to do it. So I don't know how his colleagues in Europe feel about that right now, because some people will be dying this year and next because of the lack of fuel. So let's just take a look at this 1.5 degrees Celsius thing. When James Hansen made his pitch to the US government, he claimed that temperatures were about 15 degrees Celsius. So that was in 1988. But NOAA and the WMO have said that actually in 2019 the global average temperature was 14.85 degrees Celsius, which is less than this, or 14.9 degrees Celsius, which is less than this. So what's going on here? The 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius delusion. This is an article by Ted Nordhaus, who's with the Breakthrough organization. And in it, he writes that the 2-degree target was absolutely arbitrarily set by his uncle, William Nordhaus, and he considered the limited evidence of long-term climate variance available at that time. So he said it 40 years ago. And the standard was, by his own admission, arbitrary. So that's what we're turning our world upside down over, an arbitrary number set 40 years ago before we knew a lot about climate. But let's go back to the new abnormal, the 15-minute cities. They keep claiming that they're going to build back better, but let's look at some of the risks. The 15-minute cities is a concept developed by Europeans, which may have some benefit for their high-density cities in temperate areas. It claims to provide convenience and inclusion, but they will take away your freedom of movement by car, and it will decimate downtown office infrastructure. Now, it's important to remember that COVID crashed our personal neural maps, our small and medium-sized businesses, and our office work culture. All those things kind of fell apart during the COVID lockdowns. And it seems like there was an intention to do this in order to facilitate the fourth industrial revolution, where big tech runs your smart city and neighborhood, digital currency instead of cash, no cars, on-demand transit or drone delivery, just like in the World Economic Forum video, you'll own nothing, and that a personal carbon ration will be imposed and social credit society. So why do I say these things? Aren't I really thinking like a conspiracy theorist? Well, nudge, nudge. Look what they say in this little 15-minute city. Before the recent lockdowns, we led hectic lives. It's almost like lockdowns gave us a vacation, with long commutes and not enough time to spend with our families and friends. Yeah, and then lockdowns prevented us from spending any time with them. So then they propose in this video, let's create a new normal. What if we could create a new normal? Well, why would we want to? So here's the core principles of a 15-minute city. Residents of every neighborhood have easy access to goods and services, groceries, fresh food, and healthcare. Every neighborhood has a variety of housing. Residents are able to breathe clean air, free of harmful pollutants, and green spaces for everyone to enjoy. More people can work close to home or remotely, thanks to the presence of smaller scale offices, retail, hospitality, and co-working spaces. And Carlos Morena is the guy behind this idea, and Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo championed it. But, you know, a lot of people like working downtown or in their industrial location or out in the field. A lot of people like that separation of home and work. Now, you know, sometimes you can work with people for years and never, ever have been to their house. Sometimes you work with people and you just become very good close friends, and you do go back and forth between houses, you share different family events together, but many times people are quite happy to have good friends at work and at home. They can be out on their patio with their barbecue in their flip-flops and not in their suit and, you know, playing frisbee with the kids and the dog or whatever. That's them at home, and suit and tie, that's them at work. So, you know, a lot of people like that separation. I don't know why these people assume that everyone wants to work remotely in their pajamas, because a lot of people don't. So those are some of the core principles there. And as for breathing clean, fresh air, well, here's the World Air Pollution Map. I took this screenshot earlier this evening, and here's Alberta. Doesn't look like we've got many air pollution problems in Alberta that we need to turn our world upside down for. Now, the 15-minute city goes hand in hand with the idea of a smart city, which is all interconnected. And you would hope that cities would be taking care of these things anyway. They're assuming that if you interconnect everything by the Internet of Things, that you'll have much more control over this stuff that is city management. I'm not convinced, but that's me. And features of a 20-minute neighborhood, local health facilities. Well, that's funny because we can't get enough health facilities to begin with right now. I don't know how they're going to break them all up and have more. Local schools. Well, some people don't like to have local schools, but lifelong learning opportunities, everybody has that. Local playgrounds and parks, well, that's going to cost money. Green streets and spaces, well, that sounds nice, but who's going to pay for it? Community gardens, many people already do this of their own volition. The city just has to make some land available. Sport and recreation facilities, well, what do you mean by that? That sounds expensive. Safe streets and spaces. Well, people in downtown Edmonton would love some safe streets and spaces. Also downtown Calgary. Affordable housing options. Ability to age in place. Housing diversity. Walkability. Safe cycling networks. Local public transit. And well connected to public transit jobs and services. Well, these are very costly in cities. And they're quite useful for citizens, but they're very, very costly. And local employment opportunities. Okay, but you can only have these kinds of things, local employment, local shopping centers, if you have a certain amount of density, population density. Here's part of what they plan to do with a 15-minute city. So the current model of a city is that you have all these grid of transportation avenues and streets, and only a couple of them are for bikes. So here they want to gut that and create a super block. So within this area, there would be less traffic and more walking, more biking, and so forth. Now, Infrastructure Canada has been running a little contest, the Smart Cities Challenge, and lo and behold, many cities across Canada and particularly Alberta have applied for funding because there are all kinds of big prizes, 5 million, 10 million, 50 million. That's your tax money. So it's not free. Now, population density, as I said before, is a key factor for a workable 15-minute city concept, and unless, of course, it's a climate scam. But let's take an example from some of the 15-minute city material. I'm just sipping some tea here. So one city is Barcelona. They estimate that the city proper has a high population density of 16,000 people per square kilometer. And you can see how Barcelona fits into Calgary. So that's incredibly tight, I would say. Calgary, based on its current population of 1,200,000, I think it's a bit higher than that right now. But anyway, it's 1,500 people per square kilometer. And just to give you a sense of what 16,000 people per square kilometer, these are population sizes of Wetaskiwin, Camrose, and Brooks. So that's not the population density here. That's just to give you a sense of the size of number of people. So if we look at Barcelona, we find it's on the interior side of the Mediterranean Sea. So it's quite nice and balmy there. It's in Spain, right? And here's Alberta over here. And this little book here is very important for this discussion because the European people who came to North America left this place. They came here because they wanted land, they wanted freedom, they wanted the opportunity to not live in high density serfdom, if you like, in a very class structured society. And many people who left here thought they were coming to the same kind of climate. In fact, parts of North America were called the New Andalusia, as if it would be as nice as in Spain. But the real problem is this line here, latitude. This is kind of where Utah and New Mexico and Arizona, all those warm places are, which is where Barcelona is. And then this is where we are. And if you read this book, A Cold Welcome, you'll see just how horrific it was for people to come from this climate to that climate. So what am I saying here? I am saying that not all ideas work everywhere. And this is a fundamental problem with the climate cult, is that they keep coming up with a brilliant idea, which may have application somewhere, but it will not necessarily work everywhere in the world. And yet, because it's part of climate cult thinking, it's adopted as is, with very little variation and no consideration for the extreme differences of the different geographies. And that's just one really good example right there. Now, this is just a little clip from the internet, but I thought it was worth thinking about. A smart city doesn't mean that it's intelligent. It means surveillance, monitoring, analysis, reporting, and technology. So, yeah, once you can monitor everything about you, you're pretty much under digital control of you. And we already know that Google controls almost 90% of the global market share of search advertising, Facebook 77% of mobile social traffic, Amazon almost 75% of the ebook market. This is from Klaus Schwab, Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So the big tech world already knows a lot about you, but they just don't have a way for all this information to be combined in one bundle unless you have a digital identity, which is on the move in Canada. So the digital identity would be intended to put your healthcare information there, allow you to manage your financial services and vice versa. Your food and sustainability, so you could track what you're eating, your travel and mobility, that would be like how much energy you're using when you're moving around. Humanitarian response, this is only one place where it might be helpful if people are actually in a crisis and you need to get them food, but it would be too late then. E-commerce, social platforms, e-government, telecommunications for users to own and use devices, and telecommunications to monitor devices. So, I don't know, do you really want to put all that information together in one place? Think about that. And we know that Canada is already a partner with the World Economic Forum in the Known Traveler Digital Identity. So this is kind of like a very advanced Nexus kind of pass that would give you pretty swift clearance at airports. Then there's the matter of adding digital currency onto your digital ID. So the Central Bank Digital Currency Project has been in development for some time. And this is from the Canadian Bankers Association. And they say the day may come when Canadians can no longer readily use cash for everyday transactions. Now, why would that be? Why wouldn't you be able to use cash? Like, if anything, cash is the most resilient form of transaction, because with cash, all I need is the piece of paper that we've all agreed is $5 or $10, $20, and then we can do business. The least resilient form of transaction would be digital, because if the power grid goes down, you don't have any cash. For instance, I just read this book called Cloud Money, which I'll be referring to again later, but it has a different cover later. And he's talking about the fact that before there are hurricanes in the US, for instance, people take out a lot of cash from ATMs because they know that they won't be able to take cash from ATMs after the storm, and they know they'll need to buy things, so they take cash out. They know that their cards won't work when the power grid is down, but they know if they've got 20 bucks in hand, they can buy some gas or food or whatever. So cash is the most resilient form of transacting, not digital. And I can't see why we could no longer readily use cash. We know that during COVID, cash was demonized as if it was carrying COVID bugs and people would die from using cash. Then they also go on to say individuals and businesses could use it to pay for products or services using a mobile phone or a special card or device. Well, doesn't that sound convenient? Now, here's the Bank for International Settlements, and this fellow here would like to know when you're buying a burger. He wants to know what you are spending your money on. There's a video online with him saying, we don't know what people are using their cash for. And again, in theory, if you're stopping terrorism, great. But there's all kinds of methods in progress, and in place right now to track and stop terrorism and the use of funds. But if I'm making a $10 purchase at a store, why does he need to know what I'm buying? And of course, hey, why not get healthcare in there too? So here's Interact jumping in. They're offering their services with the advent of the COVID pandemic. A new moment of change has been thrust upon us. And of course, just happens to come up a couple of years after the World Economic Forum came out with a digital identity report on the threshold of a digital identity revolution. Now, many young people will love this idea of the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, because they'll say, wow, that's really convenient. I can do everything on my phone. But they probably won't recognize that they'll have no privacy, that they could be hacked by anyone. They'll have no anonymity. All your movements and actions are traceable. It will all be centralized. Your funds could be frozen as they were for the truckers in the Freedom Convoy. Access to your money could be turned off at any moment. Every transaction is documented. You could end up with social credit scores, like are you good enough to actually take your money from the bank, or did you do something that we don't like? And you'd be vulnerable to state and foreign actors, and banks have full control of every penny you own. And this is the book I just referred to, Cloud Money. This fellow says, no, don't do it. Don't do it. It's a very interesting book. So a cashless society means you have zero cash. You can't do things like car boot sale, no tooth fairy, piggy banks, no saving cash for a rainy day, no tipping the waiter or hairdresser, no giving to the homeless, no giving to musicians, no selling unwanted items for cash, no buying anything with privacy. 100% digital currency means your life is 100% dependent on power source and the internet. And this is a little comment that is also off the internet about why you should use cash and not a digital transaction. This person says, I have a $50 banknote in my pocket. I go to the restaurant, I pay for dinner. The restaurant owner uses the bill to pay the laundry owner uses it to pay the barber, etc., etc. It still remains $50. But if I come and pay digitally, the card and bank fees for my payment are charged to the seller at 3%, so around $1.50. So every fee for every further transaction means after 30 transactions, the initial $50 remains only $5, and the remaining $45 became the property of the bank. So What does digital currency have to do with a 15-minute city? Well, I suspect, but don't know, but I suspect that they probably have a bit of bandwidth challenge. If they're going to track everything you do and have you live in smart apartments and count your carbon footprint on everything that you do, probably having most people within a 15-minute range would help them out a lot. But I don't know that for sure. Maybe there's some IT people who could comment on that in the comments below. Now, you see, the other thing is the powers that be know a lot about us now, because during COVID lockdowns, we were tracked. We were tracked in Canada, we were tracked in the UK, tracked in certain places, I believe in the US. And it's not innocent. There are these nudge units to improve the delivery of healthcare. There are nudge units. These are psychological operations within the government trying to figure out social behavioral methods of making you change your behavior to meet whatever their goals are, but to do it in a way that you don't really notice. And many of these tactics were used during COVID lockdowns. So for us as a climate science organization, this is really the nub of the matter. This fellow would like you to have a 3-ton CO2 equivalent per year carbon ration. But if you need more, you just have to buy it. Well, that's fun. Imagine that you would have to buy carbon credits that cost $170 a ton. Imagine you're trying to heat your house and you have to buy carbon credits because you live in Canada and it's cold here in winter, and 3 tons CO2 won't quite do it for you. Or maybe you'd like to eat something and you don't really want to have your friends over for fried crickets. Or maybe you do. I mean, if your friends are lizards, they'd probably love to come over and have some crickets with you. But you know what? I just, oh, there's one that's alive in there. I just can't. Well, I can, I guess, because I've got them in my hand. Anyway, just imagine you get to pop down to your local cafe, and instead of having a latte and avocado toast, you get to have a cricket snack. Quinoa and crickets. Oh, you won't be able to get quinoa anymore. You'll be printing your bread, and you won't be toasting it because that will be forbidden. You'll have to use a what's those special stoves now? I forget the name of them. Anyway, you won't be able to use a gas stove to cook anything. So you can't cook your crickets with gas. Can't cook them with gas. And you won't have any avocados because importing an avocado will probably cost you about $5,000. And you won't be able to have a latte because, of course, that comes from a cow. But you might be able to have some dairy that's made from, what is it that George Monbiot is promoting now? He wants to use some kind of bacteria to make milk and meat from. So you might be able to have some of that kind of horrible thing. 15-minute city. Low carbon footprint. Sounds great, eh? Oh, it's just a conspiracy theory. Yeah. So here we have it. My Carbon, an approach for inclusive and sustainable cities. September 14th, 2022, World Economic Forum. And in this same article, they point out that people are intensely concerned about the personal effects of climate change, and this has increased sharply in several major economies since 2015. Oh, really? Yeah, you just put Greta all over the front page of everywhere saying, how dare you? And we're all dying. We only have a few years left. And of course, younger adults tend to be more concerned than older counterparts. Well, yeah. And who did that? That was the World Economic Forum. And voila, all the cell phone companies, some of the banks, some of the credit cards, they all have a way now for you to track your carbon footprint. But really, you should look at this book by Aaron Kheriaty. He is a medical doctor, a psychiatrist in the States. He's an ethicist, and he wants people to be aware of the danger of the rise of the biomedical security state. And this is just the opening to his book from Kindle. In the space of a few weeks in early 2020, Americans witnessed the imposition of a previously unimagined social controls by the biomedical security state, unelected technocrats who suddenly enjoyed near absolute power to incarcerate, isolate, and medicate the entire population. In this chilling new book, a dissident scientist reveals the people and organizations that form the biomedical security state, its role in the origin of the pandemic, why it's a threat to science, public health, and individual freedom, and what can be done to confront and defeat this new Leviathan. And as you saw earlier, we are having this convergence of healthcare and your Interact card, and healthcare and your mobility records, and healthcare and your known traveler digital ID. So all these things are being tied to healthcare and climate change, of course. So they see you as a large emitter, even though you are not the problem. The largest emitter on the planet is China. It's not you. So you're really being had. And ironically, of course, the energy that they deny you to save the planet is what they need to track your every move and purchase. So you can see this is just Alphabet, that's Google's parent company. You can see they have a huge carbon footprint. And now they want to count every single molecule of carbon dioxide that you emit in your life. So, of course, you know about the tree planting program in Canada, how Greta Thunberg came to Canada, met with the Prime Minister, and he promised to plant 2 billion trees, right? Well, that program has now mushroomed into a $6 billion project, and they're struggling to get the trees planted, but a lot of people are cashing in on that. And there's a great website. I can put up some information about it for you in our blog. But a lot of cities think that trading carbon credits on their urban forests is a great, fantastic thing to do. But you have to remember that actual carbon markets are the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one. So people are actually buying and selling nothing. But this is what's costing you money. This costs a fortune, and it does nothing. It does zero for the environment. It does absolutely nothing for climate change. It does make quite a few people rich, but only the green crony capitalists. So, people are pretty much aware that something's wrong. Now, I'm just having a sip of tea. COVID crashed our personal neural maps. Personal neural maps are how we kind of navigate in life. Like if you get up in the dark and the lights are not working, the power's off for some reason, If you have to make your way across the living room, you probably can do that, because in your mind, you've already mapped out where you go. And in normal times, pre-COVID, most of the time we also had a daily map in our mind that we were quite comfortable with. It's the thing that helps us negotiate life and its many complexities in a fairly easy way. So you get up in the morning, you know you're going to make your tea or coffee or whatever, have your breakfast, maybe at a certain time you do your exercises, your meditation, maybe you write in a journal, maybe you get the kids up for school, then you're out the door, you have to take kids to school, or you have to drop things off at the cleaners, or whatever your daily routine would be. You know pretty much what route you're going to take to work. You know when you get to work, you're going to go up those stairs or up the elevator. You're going to meet certain people in certain rooms. All those things are already mapped out very well in your mind. And COVID pretty much cratered all of those things for almost everyone. And because of that, it made people feel very insecure. And that's why the push for a 15-minute city now, to my mind, is quite dangerous, because I think there are a lot of people looking for a sense of security again, and they might just fall for this. So we create these neural maps of where we are and how we navigate daily life. So the lure of 15-minute cities and digital services and currency for convenience and the cocoon of being cared for in a time of uncertainty, separation, abandonment by some, and alienation from many loved ones and places, this is very attractive to some people right now. But you have to be here now. Something's not right. Recognize it. Now, some of these ideas I'm taking from this book, Deep Survival. This is about people who end up lost in the woods or lost at sea, and who survives and who doesn't. And I think it's an important book to read. An organism's survival depends on a reasonable match between the mental map and the environment. As the two diverge, the hippocampus spins its wheels, and the amygdala sends out alarm signals, even as the motivational circuits urge you on and on. The result is vertigo, claustrophobia, panic, and wasted motion. Since most people aren't conscious of the process, there's no way to reflect on what's happening. All you know is that it feels as if you're going mad. This is describing somebody who's lost in the woods. And part of the terror of being lost stems from the idea of never being seen again. So you have to wonder about the psychological impact of masks. So in my opinion, the post-COVID shock may be similar to the loss of spatial orientation that people experience when they are lost in the woods, an emotional response associated with the failure of the mental map to match the environment. Now, regarding climate change and 15-minute cities, the proposition is that if you're in a 15-minute city, then you'll be using a lot less energy and thus emitting much less CO2. That's the theory, right? But is that really relevant for Canada? So let's have a look. The Parliamentary Budget Officer just issued a report, and it was about global greenhouse gas emissions and Canadian GDP. Now, most of the advocates for climate action now say that we have to do this now because in the future, if we don't do it now and immediately, in the future, our economy will suffer because of floods and droughts and who knows what. But he actually did the analysis using IPCC data and using parameters from the Environment and Climate Change Canada that said that we'd actually perhaps reach 2.5 degrees Celsius, which Dr. Ross McKittrick deems to be a very high figure. Anyway, the Parliamentary Budget Officer found that even the IPCC has acknowledged that future climate change will have negligible impact on GDP growth. And they looked at what Canada's GDP would look like with full Paris Accord compliance. And with full compliance, Canada's GDP would still be 5.8% below a do-nothing case, which means for the trillions of dollars Canada will spend fighting climate change, we would improve our GDP prospects by roughly 17 billion. So in that context, 17 billion isn't much, especially when the City of Calgary's plan is going to cost 87 billion, and when Ottawa's climate plan is going to cost 67 billion. Well, why are we spending all this money when there's no reason to do so? We're not going to stop climate change, and I'll tell you why. Because the Parliamentary Budget Officer also said, while the impact on Canadian GDP is from global GHG emissions, Canada's own emissions are not large enough to materially impact climate change. Okay? So if Canada's emissions do not materially impact climate change, Calgary's and Edmonton's emissions certainly do not. But now I'm going to talk about some things that they may be areas that are not known to you. And I have to admit, I'm not an expert on these areas, but whenever you say things like follow the money, this is where I end up. So this is why cities are goo gaga about climate change, because there's these climate bonds out there, and there are lots of them, and trillions of dollars of them now. And it turns out that most of the unions in the world and their pension funds are signatory to this group called the UNPRI, and they hold climate change as their highest priority, and that climate change is the highest priority ESG issue facing investors. And of course, their fiduciary guru is none other than Al Gore, the same guy who cheers every time Kinder Morgan or Trans Mountain Pipeline is blocked. So he's not on our side. Anyway, if you wonder why there's so many weird ESG things being forced upon us, it's because these UNPRI investors are signatory to this agreement, and they are pushing this worldwide. So there's more than 1,800 signatories. This fluctuates somewhat. I took this screenshot a while ago. 1,800 signatory institutional investor funds or pension funds from over 50 countries. They represent about $70 trillion in assets under management. And these are the guys who are all pushing things like diversity, inclusion, climate change, blah, blah, blah. And of course, Al Gore with Generation Investment Management is at the forefront of ESG. Now, just to figure out what ESG is really all about, you should read this book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital by Steven Sukup, and that will put everything in proper perspective. But why would cities be arguing for this? Why would governments be arguing for climate change when the Parliamentary Budget Officer shows us that anything we do is negligible? It won't have any effect on global climate change. Well, it's because all the investment funds and all the pensions are tied up in the UNPRI. So here's the Alberta Investment Management Corporation. These are the pension plans that they manage. The ATA Retirement Fund, that's the Alberta Teachers. Local Authorities Pension Plan, that's cities, towns, villages, municipal districts, school boards, many other public service organizations. The Management Employees Pension Plan. These are provincial public service approved agencies. Management Supplementary Retirement. Judges and Masters in Chamber. Judges and Masters Unregistered Pension Plan. The Public Service Pension Plan. Special Forces Pension Plan. Universities Academic Pension Plan. Also these endowment funds. So that's just Alberta. And when the Notley government was in power, they reported to the UNPRI. They reported on the Climate Change Policy Plan, which I find quite curious. And that was quickly wiped from that website. So to understand a bit more about this, I suggest that you read our reports, Undue Influence, Markets Skewed. This shows how these large pension funds have skewed investment markets by working with the UNPRI with this sort of common view. And these two reports rebut a report which was called Climate Change Denial is Not an Option. These are more sort of plain language reports that give you a bit more background on how these things work. So we should be clear that cities will never reach net zero, and there's also no need to do so, because CO2 is not a control knob that can fine-tune climate. So here's the former Mayor Don Iveson riding his bike to work in the winter. Good luck to you, sir. Ride your bike anywhere you want. Don't make me. So I hope that people will also have a look at these books. Peter Drucker saw a long time ago, back in the 70s, he saw that pension funds would soon become the owners of corporate America. And he called it the unseen revolution, how pension fund socialism came to America. And another book on the same kind of note is Unseen Power by Adam Harms. Now, Adam is an academic in Eastern Canada, but he writes about how mutual funds threaten the political and economic wealth of nations. So mutual funds have tremendous power, and in fact, when the Notley government came to power, a group called NEI Investments led a group of about 120 institutional investors who were signatory to the UNPRI. And they came with a little letter, I think it was submission number 107 to the climate plan. And they said, we represent $4.6 trillion in investment. And here's what we think you should do. And then they listed off the climate plan, and that's pretty much what happened in Alberta. So, they have tremendous power, but it's outside the jurisdiction of the democratic society. You don't have any say in what these guys do. And yet they have a direct say in things that directly affect your life, like they're deeply invested into renewables and all things ESG. Well, that has tripled power prices in Alberta. That's because of the climate plan of Rachel Notley. Carbon taxes, that comes from these guys as well. They have a document that talks about how they were very happy that they influenced the federal government. Then they talk about how they met with the 5 major banks, and they told them that they should toe the line on the Paris Agreement. They met with Rogers and Bell. So all the communications companies, and probably their investors there, of course, went along with what their investors told them to do. Now, you probably never heard any of this, right? Yeah. Well, this is how your life is being ruled. And this book is also very good, The Coming of Neo-Feudalism, because it gives a pretty good glimpse of where we're going. And this book I just finished reading, called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization. It's actually kind of a scary book, but I think it's probably pretty true. He talks about the fact that the US, after World War II, basically, with the US Navy, created globalization because they went to different potential trade partners and said, look, let's not have any more warring at sea. Let's do business together, and we'll put our Navy out there to protect these trade routes so that we can function as a global society. And that was great. But COVID kind of wrecked that. Supply chains are broken, and they'll get more broken. And the other thing that he points out in his book is that populations are dropping rapidly, especially in the West and in China. He claims that China has already peaked and its population is collapsing, and he sees that as being catastrophic for the parts of the world that rely on things from China, which is a lot of the world. So he does think that North America will probably be all right because we can produce things here, but there will be shortages, serious shortages, and we will have to change our ways of life. This won't be about climate change at all. This will be about economic collapse and demographic collapse in parts of the world where we normally would be doing trade. And of course, with the conflict in Ukraine, this has exacerbated some of these issues. And his book went to press just as that conflict came out. So, he couldn't really comment on it because it was already in press. But it does mean that a lot of these climate change actions are actually totally useless and a huge waste of money because we're going to need all the energy we can get. We're going to need all the money we can get to rebuild what we need right here in Alberta and in Canada, because a lot of things that we used to rely on from overseas, we just won't be able to get anymore. And again, going back to the topic of climate, this could be the worst possible time for this collapse of globalization to happen, because he foresees a reduction of fossil fuel output globally, and we foresee the potential risk of a new little ice age. This is a work by Habibulov Abdusamatov. It's out of Russia, but he's following the total solar irradiance, and he was predicting back in 2016 that there would be the beginning of a little ice age epoch. And that means there will be very erratic weather, and no one will be able to stop that. And also cooler temperatures, which usually means fewer crops, less food. So, frankly, climate change is cyclical. It's not you, and it's not CO2. So all of these crazy measures, like the 15-minute city, are completely unnecessary. And so I think we can conclude from this, from what I've shown you, that there's more to the 15-minute city than just trying to make things convenient for people, that no matter how many times you put the tinfoil hat on my head, it says right there in their own documents that they want people to only have a 2 or 3 ton CO2 equivalent personal carbon ration, and that's really the point of a 15-minute city. So that does mean climate lockdowns, and it does mean disaster for us as individuals, for people who value freedom. So I think it's important that you reject the Great Reset, that you keep your sanity, your hope, and faith alive. And as Aaron Kheriaty said in his book, fear not. You have to be strong. So be here now. Something is not right. Recognize it. Faith is a very important thing in your will to survive. Helping someone else is the best way to ensure your survival. It makes you a rescuer and not a victim. Apathy can lead to rapid psychological deterioration. So don't be apathetic. Do something. When stressed, go slow. Be sure to rest and protect your physical and emotional resources. Rehydrate frequently. Your freedoms and your future are at stake. But this is your big adventure. So if you'd like to help out Friends of Science, you can join us. You can become a member. If you'd like to know a bit more about what we do, who we are, you can go on our website, have a look around. People who love science would love our climate essay. Climate Change 101 is kind of our plain language website, more youth-oriented. We've got a huge library of materials. Up here, if you go to these, you can see how to navigate our site. And our blog is filled with all kinds of new reports and commentary. We're lucky to get a number of commentaries from Europe. We have some really good people there who send us things. So I hope that this has offered you some insights on the 15-minute cities. I hope you like my tinfoil hat, and I hope you'll support Friends of Science Society. And, you know, we're in Alberta here. We're in a pretty good place. So let's stand tall and stand firm, and let's reject the Great Reset. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling. Thanks for watching.